Is this some kind of joke, Colonel? The words, sharp and edged with disbelief, cut through the shimmering heat that hung over the flight line. Chief Warrant Officer Evans stood rigid, frustration barely hidden beneath his professional tone. His gaze wasn't directed at his commanding officer, but at the old man beside him, Theodore Brewer, calm, silent, and seemingly unaffected by the sweltering heat or the noise of distant engines, stood like a relic from another time. His coveralls were faded and stained from years of use, his calloused hands marked by decades of mechanical labor. He looked toward the silent Apache before them, the most advanced attack helicopter in the world, now sitting lifeless, as if a ghost had taken hold of its systems. Colonel Davies exhaled quietly, his voice low beneath the hum of a C-130 taxiing nearby. "Chief, this is Mr. Brewer. He's here to give us another opinion." Evans let out a short, dry laugh. "Another opinion, sir? With respect, my team's been at this for 72 hours straight. We've run every diagnostic available, swapped out the FADEC, scoped the turbines, checked every inch of the fuel lines, replaced sensors, and the data is clean. There's nothing wrong, at least not according to the system. Yet that port T700 still won't cycle past 50%. We even have GE engineers on a live link. What we don't need," he gestured toward the old man, "is analog assistance." Brewer didn't respond. His eyes, faded by age but still sharp, studied the helicopter in silence. He wasn't just looking at it. He was reading it, the stance of its landing gear, the dull sheen of its composite body, the language of its stillness. A small group of younger mechanics had gathered nearby. They were the best in the business, masters of digital systems and diagnostics, yet this machine had beaten them. Now they watched the old man with quiet skepticism and curiosity, whispering among themselves, "Who was he? Some retired legend? A symbolic gesture?" "Let him take a look, Chief," Davies said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Evans clenched his jaw and stepped aside. "Fine, the floor's yours, Mr. Brewer. Just try not to touch anything. This equipment is extremely sensitive." Brewer nodded slowly in acknowledgement and began to move. But instead of heading for the open engine cowling where the team had been focused, he started at the helicopter's tail. His rough fingers traced the edge of the stabilator as he walked, slow and deliberate. Every motion was measured, every pause deliberate. A man who belonged in this world of jet fuel and hydraulic lines. He circled the Apache, occasionally tilting his head as though listening for something. The young crew exchanged smirks. To them, he looked more like a farmer inspecting livestock than an engineer diagnosing an advanced turbine system. Finally, Brewer stopped beneath the port engine, the same one that had grounded the bird for 3 days. Without looking up, he knelt down, joints creaking, and peered beneath the fuselage. "Flashlight," he said quietly. His voice was rough, as though rarely used. A young sergeant, eager to help, rushed forward and handed him a flashlight. Evans sighed, crossing his arms. "Sir, we've already used high-resolution imaging equipment. A flashlight isn't going to show us anything new." Brewer ignored him. He directed the beam under the aircraft, studying the light as it reflected off rivets and seams. Then, placing one hand on the helicopter's skin, he closed his eyes. To the young mechanics, it looked absurd. An old man feeling a machine. But Davies saw something else. A craftsman in silent conversation with his work. He'd heard the rumors. About a man from the Vietnam era who could sense microfractures through layers of metal. A ghost mechanic whose instincts outperformed sensors. Davies had brought Brewer here as a last resort, a quiet plea to a forgotten master of the flight line. After a long moment, Brewer opened his eyes and rose slowly. From the pocket of his coveralls, he pulled out a worn leather roll. Unfolding it revealed a set of handmade tools, each shaped by years of use, their handles polished smooth. Evans frowned. "What in the world are those?" Brewer chose one. A slender metal rod bent at a sharp, deliberate angle. Its fine tip gleamed in the sun, more like a craftsman's pick than anything from a modern toolkit. "You're not putting that near my engine," Evans snapped, his patience breaking. "That's it, sir, we're done here. I respect the effort, but this is wasting everyone's time." Brewer didn't respond. The sunlight glinted off the polished metal in his hand. For a brief moment, everything seemed to slow, the noise of the airfield fading into the distant thrum of an old Huey somewhere in memory. The sharp scent of jet fuel, Mixed suddenly with the damp metallic trace of blood and fear, he was no longer standing on a clean, American flight line. He was back in a muddy clearing in the Ashau Valley. Rain beat down, soaking his hair and face. A young pilot, pale with panic, shouted through the storm, "We have to go, they're coming." The Huey's engine coughed and sputtered, a vital linkage severed by shrapnel. There were no spare parts, no proper tools, only the wreckage of a burned-out truck nearby. In his mind's eye, he saw his younger self hammering a red-hot strip of leaf spring against a rock, shaping and grinding it into the same tool he now held. That tool had saved lives. It allowed him to bypass the broken linkage, a repair that should have been impossible, and the helicopter had lifted off just as enemy forces broke through the trees, carrying a dozen wounded soldiers to safety. The tool wasn't just metal, it was memory, and a promise. Back in the present, Sergeant Miller, a young, skilled mechanic who had been observing the exchange, felt anger rising in his chest. He'd seen how Evans had treated the old man, the clear disrespect. But he had also seen something else in Mr. Brewer's eyes, a deep, quiet certainty. Miller recognized that look. He'd once seen it in the eyes of a bomb disposal expert moments before defusing a live IED. The look of a man who perceived the world differently, who saw invisible chains of cause and effect where others saw confusion. Evans stepped toward Theodore, raising a hand as if to physically stop him. "Mr. Brewer, I'm ordering you to step away from the aircraft. You are a civilian interfering with critical military equipment. Don't make me call security." It was the final humiliation, the moment that crossed a line. The threat of arrest lingered heavily in the warm air. Around them, the other mechanics shifted uneasily. What had begun as curiosity was now turning into a confrontation. Miller knew speaking up would risk his career. He couldn't openly challenge a chief warrant officer. But standing by felt wrong. Quietly, he pulled out his phone, keeping it low and out of Evans's view. His thumbs moved quickly over the screen, sending a brief, urgent message, not to a friend, but to the colonel's executive aide who was monitoring operations from the command tower. The message was short and direct. "Sir, C.W. Evans is about to have Mr. Brewer escorted off the flight line by security. He's threatening to detain him. The colonel needs to get down here right now. I think the old man's found it. I really think he found it." Miller pressed send. The message moved quickly across the base network, a small but significant act of quiet defiance. In that moment, both Miller and the unseen audience understood something Evans and his team didn't. Help was already on its way. The situation was shifting, and soon the quiet persistence of the old mechanic would be proven right in a way no one expected. Inside the calm, air-conditioned command building, Colonel Davies pushed through his office doors, his expression tense. His aide met him immediately, phone in hand. "Sir, message from Sergeant Miller, flight line," he said. Davies took the phone, scanning the text. His face hardened. "Get me base archives." The aide, already anticipating the order, dialed the number instantly. Moments later, a calm voice answered. "Archives, Specialist Rowe speaking." "This is Colonel Davies," he said. "I need a personnel file. Brewer Theodore. Likely served between the late 60s and early 80s. Aviation maintenance." There was a brief pause followed by the quick tapping of keys. "One moment, sir." "Got it, Brewer Theodore." "Wow, yes, sir, this file is extensive." "Read me his commendations," Davies ordered, pacing behind his desk. "Yes, sir," Rowe replied. "Let's see. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, 16 air medals, 1 with a V for Valor, and a Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Sir, the full commendation list runs 4 pages. Davies stopped pacing. "What about the citations?" "The narratives?" "Right, sir. The Distinguished Service Cross citation reads, 'For extraordinary heroism in action on March 12, 1969, Specialist Brewer, disregarding his own safety, remained with a downed medevac helicopter under intense enemy fire. For 6 hours, using improvised tools made from wreckage, he repaired a severely damaged rotor assembly and a severed fuel line, enabling the evacuation of 9 critically wounded soldiers.'" Rowe hesitated. "Sir, there's more, several similar accounts. Field repairs under fire, in-flight engine swaps, landing gear rebuilds during active combat. His peers called him the ghost of the AH because he could make dead aircraft fly again. Davies felt a chill run through him despite the cool air of his office. He'd known Brewer was talented, but this was something else. It was legend. He realized now that he hadn't just called in a mechanic. He had called in a man whose hands had once rewritten the limits of possibility. "There's also a note here," Rowe added, "from a General Peterson." The specialist hesitated for a moment, then added, "Sir, it looks like General Peterson himself wrote this note. It says, if this man ever asks for anything, give it to him. He is the finest battlefield mechanic this army has ever produced." Full stop. Davies hung up the phone in silence. His aide looked at him eyes wide. "Sir?" "Get my car," Davies said sharply. "And get 4-star General Peterson on the line. Tell him a ghost from his past is standing on our flight line, and he's being threatened with arrest." Back on the tarmac, the confrontation had reached its breaking point. Theodore, still holding his unusual handmade tool, ignored Evans's threats completely. He pointed with its narrow tip toward a deep section of the engine, buried beneath a cluster of wires and conduits. "There," he said calmly. "The bleed air valve's pneumatic line, it's cracked." Evans squinted, his face flushed with disbelief. "That's impossible. We scoped that section twice. The fiber optic found nothing. There is no crack." He stepped forward, blocking Theodore's access. "That's enough," he snapped. Turning to one of the younger mechanics, he barked, "Sergeant, go call security forces. Tell them we have an unauthorized civilian interfering with restricted equipment." The young sergeant froze, glancing between Evans's furious expression, Theodore's steady calm, and Colonel Davies's silent authority. It was a direct order, but one that felt wrong. Before he could move, the sound of screeching tires tore through the air. A black Ford Expedition with official government plates raced onto the flight line, ignoring every regulation in the book. It came to a halt just yards from the Apache. Every mechanic straightened instantly. Evans turned in shock, his authority momentarily shattered. Colonel Davies stepped out of the passenger seat, his face like thunder. But the man who exited the rear door silenced the entire line. He was older, but carried himself with strength and purpose. The flight suit he wore bore 4 shining stars on the shoulders, the unmistakable insignia of a full general. His presence alone commanded respect. It was General Peterson, the visiting commander from Army Futures Command. Seeing a 4-star general appear unannounced on an active flight line was almost unthinkable. The noise around them seemed to fade. Even the wind stilled. Evans's anger drained into dread. He straightened and snapped into the stiffest salute of his career. "General, sir, I wasn't aware you were..." But Peterson didn't respond. He walked straight past him, eyes fixed on one person. He passed the gleaming Apache and the team of mechanics, stopping directly before Theodore Brewer. The entire line held its breath. Then the general, a man who commanded armies and advised presidents, came to attention. He clicked his heels and raised a flawless salute. It was not a salute given out of rank, but one of respect, from one soldier to another, from a man who owed his life to the one standing before him. "Teddy," he said quietly, emotion in his voice. "My God, it's really you." Theodore slowly lowered his tool, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Pete," he said with a faint smile. "You got old." A brief, choked laugh escaped the general. He dropped his salute and turned to face the stunned mechanics. His voice carried across the flight line, strong and unwavering. "Men, you are in the presence of a living legend. This is Theodore Brewer. When I was a 23-year-old captain, my helicopter went down in the Drang Valley. We were surrounded under heavy fire with multiple wounded. No one could reach us, but Teddy Brewer flew in on a dust-off Huey that should have never been in the air. He landed through gunfire, rigged our broken engine with a Leatherman and some wire, and somehow got that bird flying again. He saved 18 American lives that day." The general turned to Colonel Davies. "Colonel, read the man's citation. Everyone here needs to hear it." Davies pulled out his phone. His hands were steady, his voice firm as he began, reading aloud the official citation for the distinguished Service Cross, the story of an impossible repair carried out under fire, a quiet act of heroism that never sought recognition. As Colonel Davies read aloud, the smirks on the young mechanics' faces slowly vanished. What replaced them was awe, pure and sincere. They no longer saw a confused old man. They saw a legend standing before them. When Davies finished reading, silence settled over the group. General Peterson's eyes, cold and steady as stone, shifted toward Chief Warrant Officer Evans. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight in his calm tone carried more authority than any outburst. "Chief," the general began evenly, "you have millions of dollars in diagnostic tools, laptops that can measure turbine blade tolerance down to a fraction of an inch, but none of that technology can teach you to listen. It can't teach you humility, and it certainly can't teach respect." He nodded toward Theodore. "This man's hands have forgotten more about keeping soldiers alive by keeping these machines flying than you'll ever learn from a computer screen. Your diagnostics showed nothing wrong, but he listened and then found the truth. You failed because you trusted only the machine. He succeeded because he knew when not to." The rebuke was public and final. Evans' face, once flushed with anger, turned pale. He stared at the ground, unable to meet the general's eyes. Then Theodore Brewer, the man at the center of it all, took a slow step forward. His voice was calm and kind. "It's not your fault, son," he said gently. "The machines are loud and the computers are louder. You were trained to hear the noise, but the machine always whispers the truth. You just have to be quiet enough to listen." He lifted his handmade tool, forged long ago under battlefield conditions. "Your scope missed the fracture because it's a pressure crack. It only opens when the pneumatic line is under strain, around 50% spool up. It's invisible when cold or idle. Your diagnostics read a static state. I was listening for the moment of failure, the moment it became broken." As he spoke, an old memory resurfaced, of a muddy clearing decades earlier, using that very tool on a damaged Huey helicopter. He remembered not just looking but feeling, his arm sensing the faint vibration that revealed weakness in the metal. The tool wasn't merely an instrument, it was an extension of his instincts, shaped by necessity and experience. Back on the tarmac, Theodore looked at Evans again. "You don't find a problem like this with your eyes," he said quietly. "You find it with your hands." Following Theodore's detailed directions, the crew, including a humbled Evans, removed the pneumatic line. Under a microscope, they saw it. A nearly invisible fracture, thinner than a strand of hair, exactly where Theodore had said. The part was replaced and the Apache reassembled. With General Peterson and Colonel Davies watching, the pilot started the engine. The turbine spooled to 50, 60, then 80%, running perfectly. The problem was gone. Peterson turned to Davies. "I want a new training module for every maintenance crew on base," he ordered. "Call it Advanced Tactile Diagnostics and Intuitive Engineering. And its lead instructor," he placed a hand on Theodore's shoulder, "will be Mr. Brewer, if he'll accept the position." The next day, a formal commendation honored Theodore's contribution and reinstated his remarkable service record for the new generation. Chief Warrant Officer Evans wasn't punished traditionally. Instead, he became the first student in Theodore's new course. Weeks later, inside the base workshop, Evans stood at a workbench, struggling to file a small block of aluminum, trying to recreate one of Theodore's handmade tools. His movements were awkward and uncertain. A shadow fell over him. Theodore stood beside him, holding a cup of coffee. He watched quietly, then set the mug down and adjusted Evans's grip. "Easy," he murmured. "Don't fight it. Let the tool do the work. Feel how it wants to cut." Under the old mechanic's patient guidance, Evans's strokes grew steadier. He was still learning, but for the first time, he wasn't forcing the motion. He was listening to it. In that quiet workshop, far from noise and pressure, a different kind of repair was taking place. One of humility, mentorship, and the transfer of timeless wisdom. Theodore Brewer's story reminds us that the most powerful tools aren't always in a box. They're in the hands and hearts of those who came before. Real mastery isn't downloaded. It's earned through experience and perseverance. If this story of quiet valor inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories, and share it with someone who appreciates the silent masters among us.